Right before we dive in, let's make this story bigger than just me and you. Tell me in the comments, what part of the world are you watching from? And what's the clock striking there? Morning, night, or somewhere in between? I want to see how far this story can reach. Now lean closer. Here's where it all begins. The bullet that should have killed Céleste Moreau whistled past her ear as her body moved with deadly precision she had never learned, drawing a hidden derringer from her corset and returning fire with accuracy that belonged to someone else entirely. The drunk cowboy who had tried to force himself on her collapsed with a hole through his heart, while Céleste stared at the smoking weapon in her delicate hand, horrified by skills that came from memories that weren't her own. "Well done, little sparrow," came a voice inside her mind, deep and masculine and utterly alien to her own thoughts. "Though you could have aimed for his shoulder first, killing should always be the last resort, not the first." The voice carried the weight of experience and the drawl of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of violence, someone who definitely shouldn't exist inside the head of a 19-year-old saloon girl from Louisiana. Celeste's hand trembled as she dropped the derringer, her emerald dress splattered with blood that wasn't her own, while the other patrons of the Red Desert Saloon stared at her in stunned silence. She had come to Arizona territory to escape her family's debts and disgrace, taking work as a singer and server in the rough frontier town of Perdition Gulch, but she had never held a gun before tonight. Never even seen violence up close until the moment when survival had demanded skills she didn't possess. "My name is Alexandre Beaumont," the voice continued, its tone gentle despite the circumstances. "I was the fastest gun in 3 territories before a coward's bullet ended my life 6 months ago. Now I'm sharing your mind and your body, and I'm afraid we're both in more danger than you realize." The impossibility of the situation should have driven her to madness, but instead, Céleste felt an odd sense of comfort from the presence, as if she had gained a guardian angel who happened to be a legendary gunfighter. The sheriff's arrival interrupted her racing thoughts, his eyes taking in the dead man and the weapon at her feet while his hand rested on his own gun. "Miss Moreau," Sheriff Hawkins said slowly, "I'm going to need you to explain how a saloon girl managed to put a bullet through the heart of a man who was known for being quick on the draw himself." The question hung in the air like smoke, and Céleste realized that her answer would determine whether she faced justice or suspicion, and whether the voice in her head would help her survive what was coming next. 6 months earlier, Alexandre Beaumont had been everything the frontier respected and feared, a gunslinger whose reputation was built on honor rather than cruelty, a man who used his deadly skills to protect the innocent rather than prey upon them. His legend had grown from Louisiana to California, stories told around campfires about the Cajun who could draw faster than lightning and shoot straighter than divine judgment, but who never killed a man who didn't deserve killing. The town of Silver Creek had hired Alexandra to clean out a gang of claim jumpers who were terrorizing miners and their families, offering him $500 and the gratitude of honest folks who just wanted to work their land in peace. The job should have been routine for someone of his abilities. Track down the outlaws, give them a chance to surrender, and eliminate them if they chose violence over justice. He had done similar work dozens of times before, always emerging victorious but never unscathed by the necessity of taking human life. But the Baxter Gang had prepared for Alexandra's arrival with careful planning and cowardly tactics, studying his methods and moral code to find weaknesses they could exploit. They knew he would face them honorably, giving them the chance to draw first in fair combat, and they had arranged for a hidden sniper to ensure that honor would be rewarded with death rather than victory. The ambush was set in the main street of Silver Creek, where innocent people would be endangered if Alexandra tried to avoid the confrontation. The showdown played out exactly as Alexandra had expected until the moment when Jacob Baxter's hand moved toward his gun, triggering Alexandra's lightning-fast draw and the perfectly aimed shot that should have ended the gang leader's threat to the community. But even as his bullet found its mark, Alexandra felt the impact of the sniper's shot, a .44 caliber ball that punched through his chest and dropped him to the dusty street while his killer escaped into the chaos that followed. Alexandra's final moments were spent not in fear or regret, but in rage at the injustice of his death and concern for the innocent people he would no longer be able to protect. His last coherent thought was a prayer to whatever forces governed life and death, asking for another chance to finish the work he had started, to see justice done and the innocent protected from predators who hid behind cowardice and superior numbers. He died with his guns in his hands and his mission incomplete, never imagining that his prayer would be answered in ways that defied everything he thought he knew about life, death, and the boundaries between them. Céleste Moreau's arrival in Perdition Gulch had been driven by desperation rather than adventure. Fleeing New Orleans after her father's gambling debts were inherited by creditors who viewed his beautiful daughter as collateral that could be collected in ways that had nothing to do with money. The stagecoach journey to Arizona territory had been her escape from a life that would have destroyed her innocence and dignity, carrying her toward an uncertain future that seemed preferable to the certain doom she was leaving behind. The Red Desert Saloon was not the kind of establishment where respectable women worked, but respectability was a luxury that Céleste could no longer afford, and the job offered both wages and protection from the kind of men who preyed on women traveling alone through frontier territory. Her voice was beautiful enough to earn tips from lonely cowboys, and her quick wit helped her avoid the more dangerous aspects of saloon life, but she lived each day knowing that her situation was precarious and her options were limited. The first time she heard Alexandre's voice, Céleste had been alone in her small room above the saloon, brushing her hair and preparing for sleep, when suddenly her mind was filled with thoughts that weren't her own. The voice had been confused and disoriented, speaking in French-accented English about places and people she didn't recognize, carrying memories of violence and death that belonged to someone who had lived a very different life than hers. Initially, she had assumed the voice was a sign of madness, brought on by stress and isolation, the kind of mental breakdown that could afflict anyone who had endured too much trauma and change in too short a time. But Alexandra's presence proved to be consistent and interactive, responding to her thoughts and questions with intelligence and personality that suggested something more than simple delusion or psychological breakdown. The partnership that developed between them was unprecedented in both their experiences, Alexandra's consciousness somehow sharing space with Céleste's mind while retaining his own memories, skills, and personality. He could see through her eyes, feel through her senses, and communicate with her through thoughts that bypassed her conscious control. In return, she gained access to abilities and knowledge that no saloon girl should possess, creating a combination that would prove both beneficial and dangerous in the harsh world of frontier justice. The weeks following Alexandra's arrival in her consciousness were filled with confusion and wonder, as Céleste learned to navigate life with a legendary gunslinger sharing her thoughts and experiences. Alexandra proved to be a gentleman even in death, respecting her privacy and offering guidance without trying to control her actions, but his presence changed everything about how she experienced the world around her. "That man in the corner has been watching you for 3 days," Alexandra warned during one of her performances, his voice carrying the weight of experience with dangerous situations. "He's armed with a knife in his boot and a derringer in his vest pocket, and he's been asking questions about your schedule and living arrangements. I suggest you stay close to the bartender tonight and avoid going upstairs alone." His ability to read people and situations with deadly accuracy had kept him alive for years, and now it was keeping Céleste safe from threats she would never have recognized on her own. The skills that Alexandra shared with her were more than just combat techniques. He taught her to read body language, to spot concealed weapons, to identify escape routes, and defensive positions in any room she entered. His knowledge of human nature and criminal behavior transformed her from naive victim to aware survivor, able to navigate the dangerous world of frontier saloons with confidence that was backed by genuine ability. But the most unexpected aspect of their partnership was the emotional connection that developed between them. As Alexandre's protective instincts and Céleste's compassionate nature created a bond that transcended the physical boundaries of life and death. He shared stories of his past while she shared her dreams for the future, creating an intimacy that was unlike anything either had experienced with another person. "I've been alone for so long," Alexandre confessed one night, as Céleste lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the impossibility of her situation. "Even when I was alive, my reputation kept people at a distance. They feared me or wanted to use me, but they never really knew me. With you, I can be myself without the weight of legend or the burden of violence. You see the man I was before the guns and the killing, and that gift is more precious than you know." The vulnerability in his voice revealed depths of loneliness and pain that his legend had never captured, making Céleste understand that even heroes could be broken by the lives they were forced to live. Sheriff Tom Hawkins was the kind of lawman that frontier towns needed. Honest, experienced, and tough enough to maintain order without becoming the kind of tyrant who created more problems than he solved. His investigation of the shooting at the Red Desert Saloon was thorough and professional, but his instincts told him that there was more to Céleste Moreau's story than a simple case of self-defense against an aggressive drunk. "Miss Moreau," the sheriff said as he questioned her in his office the next morning, "I've been wearing this badge for 15 years, and I've never seen a saloon girl handle a gun like you did last night. That shot was placed with precision that takes years of practice to develop, and your draw was smooth enough to impress professional gunfighters. Where exactly did you learn to shoot like that?" His questions were polite but persistent, the tone of a man who had learned not to accept easy answers when his experience suggested deeper complexities. "Tell him the truth," Alexandre advised, his mental voice carrying amusement at the irony of the situation. Not the whole truth, obviously, but enough to satisfy his curiosity without raising more questions. "Say your father taught you to shoot when you were young, that you've always had good hand-eye coordination, and that desperation made you better than you knew you could be. Men understand desperation, and they respect survival instincts." Céleste followed Alexandre's guidance, weaving a story that was plausible without being complete, explaining her skills through family background and natural ability rather than supernatural partnership with a dead gunfighter. Sheriff Hawkins listened carefully, his experienced eyes watching for signs of deception, but Alexandre's coaching helped her maintain composure and consistency that satisfied the lawman's concerns about her innocence in the shooting. But the sheriff's final question revealed that his interest in Céleste went beyond simple law enforcement. As he leaned back in his chair and studied her with eyes that had seen too much violence and death. "The man you killed last night was named Dutch Morrison, and he rode with the Baxter Gang until about 6 months ago. They've been hitting banks and mines throughout the territory, always staying one step ahead of the law, and Dutch might have been planning to rejoin them after laying low here in town. Did he say anything to you before the shooting? Anything that might help me track down his former associates?" The connection between her attacker and Alexandre's unfinished business was too coincidental to ignore, suggesting that their partnership was about to become much more complicated and dangerous than either had anticipated. The revelation that Dutch Morrison had been connected to the Baxter Gang sent shockwaves through Alexandre's consciousness, his mental voice carrying rage and determination that made Céleste's hands tremble with emotions that weren't entirely her own. "Those bastards killed me through cowardice and treachery," he said, his words carrying the weight of unfinished vengeance. "If Dutch was planning to rejoin them, it means they're still operating in this territory, still preying on innocent people who can't defend themselves. We have to stop them, Céleste. It's what I was born to do." And now it's what we must do together. Céleste's reaction to Alexandre's desire for justice was complicated by her own desire for safety and anonymity, creating internal conflict between her survival instincts and his sense of duty. "I'm not a gunfighter," she whispered to herself in the privacy of her room, speaking aloud to the voice that only she could hear. "I'm a saloon girl who's trying to stay alive in a dangerous world. I can't go hunting outlaws just because you have unfinished business with them." "I'm not asking you to become a killer," Alexandre replied gently, his tone understanding but firm. "I'm asking you to help me protect innocent people from predators who will continue to hurt and kill until someone stops them. You have my skills now, my knowledge and experience, but more importantly, you have something I never had, the ability to move through society without being recognized as a threat. We can gather information, track their movements, and find ways to help the law bring them to justice." Sheriff Hawkins' investigation into Dutch Morrison's background provided the first leads they needed, revealing that the dead outlaw had been receiving messages through the telegraph office and had made several trips to the mining camps outside town in the weeks before his death. The pattern suggested that he had been gathering intelligence for a major robbery, possibly targeting the monthly gold shipment that moved through Perdition Gulch on its way to the territorial capital. "The Baxter Gang always did their homework before a job," Alexandre explained, as Céleste eavesdropped on conversations in the saloon, using her position to gather information that would have been impossible for a traditional investigator to obtain. They'd spend weeks studying their targets, learning schedules and security arrangements, identifying weaknesses they could exploit. If Dutch was scouting the gold shipment, they're planning something big, and we're the only ones who know enough to stop them. The weight of responsibility settled on Céleste's shoulders like a heavy cloak, but Alexandre's presence gave her strength she never knew she possessed. The first members of the Baxter Gang arrived in Perdition Gulch 3 days after Dutch Morrison's funeral, their presence immediately recognizable to Alexandre's experienced consciousness, even though they appeared to be ordinary travelers seeking rooms and supplies. "The tall one with the scar is Joaquin Santos," Alexandre told Céleste as she served drinks to the new arrivals. "He's Jacob Baxter's lieutenant, skilled with both guns and knives, and he has a reputation for cruelty that makes most outlaws uncomfortable. The other two are probably scouts, checking the town's defenses and looking for Dutch's intelligence reports." Céleste's position in the saloon made her nearly invisible to men who saw serving girls as furniture rather than people, allowing her to observe and eavesdrop without raising suspicion while Alexandre analyzed everything she saw and heard. The gang members' conversations revealed details about their planned robbery that would have taken traditional investigators weeks to discover, information about timing, routes, and personnel that could mean the difference between success and failure for both sides. "They're planning to hit the gold shipment 2 days from now," Alexandre said, after listening to a coded conversation between Santos and one of his companions. "The wagon will be ambushed at Devil's Canyon, where the road narrows between rock walls that provide perfect cover for attackers. They know the guards' names, their weapons, even their rotation schedule. Someone inside the mining operation is feeding them information." The realization that the gang had inside help explained how they had stayed ahead of the law for so long, but it also created new dangers for anyone trying to stop them. If they could identify and eliminate the informant, they could disrupt the gang's plans while also protecting the innocent people who would be caught in the crossfire of the robbery. But discovering the traitor's identity would require risks that could expose both Céleste and Alexandre to deadly retaliation. Sheriff Hawkins proved to be more perceptive than the gang expected when Céleste approached him with carefully edited information about suspicious strangers in town, his lawman's instincts immediately recognizing the significance of what she was telling him. "Miss Moreau," he said quietly, "I don't know how you came by this information, and I'm not going to ask questions that might put you in danger. But if you're right about these men, You may have just saved a lot of lives and prevented a crime that would have set this territory back years. The partnership between law enforcement and supernatural justice was about to be tested in ways that none of them could have anticipated. Alexandra's knowledge of criminal psychology and Celeste's access to local gossip combined to identify the gang's informant within hours of beginning their investigation, revealing that the traitor was someone whose position provided perfect access to the information the Baxter Gang needed. "It's Marcus Webb, the telegraph operator," Alexandra said, after analyzing the patterns of communication and behavior that Celeste had observed. "He's been deep in debt to gambling creditors, and the gang probably offered him enough money to clear his obligations in exchange for inside information about gold shipments and law enforcement activities." The evidence against Webb was circumstantial but compelling. His sudden ability to pay off debts that had plagued him for months, his nervous behavior whenever the gold shipments were discussed, and most damning, his presence in the telegraph office during off hours when the gang members had been seen leaving the building. Celeste's feminine intuition, combined with Alexandra's criminal expertise, had identified a pattern that more traditional investigation might have missed entirely. Confronting Webb required delicate handling to avoid alerting the gang to their investigation, but Alexandra's experience with interrogation and Celeste's understanding of human nature provided the perfect combination of pressure and sympathy. "Don't threaten him," Alexandra advised as Celeste approached the nervous telegraph operator. "Offer him a way out that lets him save face while doing the right thing. Men like Webb aren't evil, just weak, and they'll usually choose redemption over destruction if you give them the option." Webb's confession came in a flood of guilt and relief, admitting to his betrayal while begging for protection from both the law and the criminals who had corrupted him. "They said they'd kill me if I didn't cooperate," he sobbed, his hands shaking as he revealed the full scope of the gang's intelligence network. "But they also said they'd kill me if I ever tried to back out. I've been trapped for months, watching them plan crimes and knowing that innocent people would die because of information I provided." The intelligence Webb provided was invaluable. Detailed plans for the gold shipment robbery, the locations where gang members were hiding, and most importantly, the identity of Jacob Baxter's current hideout in the abandoned silver mine 20 miles outside town. "Now we have them," Alexandra said with grim satisfaction. "But we also have a problem. If we move too quickly, they'll scatter and regroup somewhere else. If we wait too long, they'll complete their robbery and disappear with enough gold to fund years of criminal activity. We need to coordinate with the sheriff to time this perfectly." Sheriff Hawkins' reaction to the intelligence about the Baxter Gang was professional calm masking deep concern about the scope of the threat they were facing and the limited resources available to counter it. "Miss Moreau," he said after reviewing Webb's confession and the evidence she had provided, "I don't know how you managed to uncover all this information, but you may have prevented the worst robbery in territorial history. The problem is that I have 2 deputies and they have at least 8 armed men, which means we need help from the territorial marshal's office." "That will take too long," Alexandra warned, his consciousness filled with urgency that Celeste could feel like a physical pressure in her chest. "The gang will move before federal help can arrive, either completing their robbery or relocating to avoid capture. We need to act with what we have, using surprise and superior tactics to overcome their numerical advantage. It's what I would have done when I was alive, and it's what we must do now." The plan that emerged from their desperate situation was audacious enough to be called insane, but it was also the only strategy that offered any hope of success against overwhelming odds. Celeste would use her position at the saloon to confirm the gang's final preparations, while Alexandra guided her in setting traps and creating diversions that would scatter their forces and disrupt their coordination. Sheriff Hawkins and his deputies would handle the actual arrests, but only after the gang had been weakened and confused by preliminary strikes. "The key is to make them believe they're facing a larger force than they actually are," Alexandria explained as they refined their strategy. Outlaws are basically cowards, who only fight when they're confident of victory. If we can create enough chaos and uncertainty, most of them will try to escape rather than stand and fight. We only need to capture or kill the leaders. The followers will scatter without direction. But the most dangerous aspect of their plan was that it required Céleste to take active risks, rather than simply gathering information, putting her directly in harm's way while relying on Alexandra's skills and knowledge to keep her alive. The transformation from observer to participant would test their partnership in ways that neither had anticipated, forcing them to trust each other completely while facing enemies who would show no mercy to anyone who stood in their way. "I won't let anything happen to you," Alexandre promised, his mental voice carrying determination that transcended death itself. "You've given me a chance to finish my work and protect innocent people. I'll die 1,000 times before I let them hurt you." The evening before their planned confrontation with the Baxter Gang, Céleste found herself unable to sleep, her mind racing with anticipation and fear, while Alexandra's presence provided both comfort and additional anxiety about the dangers they would face together. The saloon was quieter than usual, as if the building itself sensed the approaching violence, and even the regular customers seemed subdued by atmospheric tension that had no obvious source. "I need to tell you something," Alexandra said as Céleste sat by her window, looking out at the desert night and thinking about the possibility that tomorrow might be her last day alive. "In all my years as a gunfighter, I never felt fear before a fight because I had nothing to lose except my own life. But now I'm terrified, not for myself, but for you. Because losing you would mean losing the only real connection I've ever had with another person." The confession revealed depths of emotion that surprised them both, acknowledging that their partnership had evolved into something deeper than simple cooperation between the living and the dead. Céleste's feelings for Alexandre were equally complex, combining gratitude for his protection with genuine affection for the gentle soul that existed beneath his legendary reputation, creating a bond that defied every rational explanation while feeling more real than anything else in her life. "I'm scared too," she whispered into the darkness, speaking to the voice that only she could hear, but that had become more real to her than most living people. "Not just of dying, but of losing you when this is over. If we succeed tomorrow, if we stop the gang and bring them to justice, will you move on to whatever comes after death? Will I be alone again?" The question had been haunting her for days, the possibility that success might mean separation from the only person who truly understood her. "I don't know what happens after we finish this business," Alexandre admitted, his mental voice carrying uncertainty that was unusual for someone who had faced death so many times. "I've never heard of anything like what's happened to us, this connection between life and death that lets us share thoughts and experiences. But I do know that whatever brought us together was more powerful than death itself, and I can't believe that such a force would create something beautiful just to destroy it when the work is done." The hope in his words gave Céleste strength to face whatever tomorrow would bring, but it also reminded her that their time together might be limited by forces neither of them could control or understand. Dawn broke over Perdition Gulch with the kind of crystal clarity that made the desert beautiful and deadly in equal measure, the perfect weather for a confrontation that would determine whether justice or chaos ruled the territory. Céleste moved through her morning routine at the saloon with hands that were steady despite the fear that gnawed at her stomach, Alexandra's presence providing calm confidence that masked her own nervousness about the plan they were about to execute. The first phase of their strategy involved confirming that the gang members were still in position and had not detected the threat to their plans, a reconnaissance mission that required Céleste to visit the general store and telegraph office, while Alexandra analyzed everything she observed for signs of suspicious activity or changes in behavior. "They're still here," he confirmed after she had completed her circuit of the town. Santos is at the hotel, probably waiting for final confirmation of the gold shipment's departure time. The others are maintaining their cover. But they're all carrying more weapons than they were yesterday. Sheriff Hawkins had positioned his deputies according to their plan, with one man covering the telegraph office and another watching the hotel, while Hawkins himself prepared to coordinate the arrests once the gang had been disrupted and confused by their preliminary strikes. The lawmen were outnumbered and outgunned, but they had advantages of surprise and local knowledge that would prove decisive if the plan worked as intended. "Remember," Alexandra said as Céleste prepared for the most dangerous part of their mission, "your job is to create chaos and confusion, not to fight a battle. Use the skills I've shared with you to stay alive and mobile, but don't try to be a hero. Heroes often end up dead. And I need you alive more than I need vengeance against these particular criminals." The signal for action came when the gold shipment's guards entered the saloon for their traditional pre-departure drink, a routine that the gang had been observing for weeks while planning their ambush. Celeste's task was to delay the guards long enough for Sheriff Hawkins to reach the gang's informant and prevent him from sending the departure confirmation, disrupting the precisely timed coordination that the robbery required. But even as she moved to execute their plan, Céleste could feel Alexandra's consciousness tense with anticipation, his warrior's instincts recognizing that they were about to cross a line from which there could be no retreat. The confrontation began not with gunfire but with the crash of breaking glass as Céleste accidentally dropped a tray of drinks near the gold shipment guards, creating the distraction that allowed Sheriff Hawkins to arrest Marcus Webb before he could send the signal that would trigger the gang's ambush. "Perfect timing," Alexandra said with professional appreciation as chaos erupted throughout the saloon. "Now move toward the back door. Santos will be here within minutes, and we need to be in position to intercept him." The gang's response to the disruption of their plans was swift and violent, as Santos and two companions burst through the saloon's front door with weapons drawn, their eyes scanning for threats while demanding to know why Webb hadn't sent the expected telegraph signal. But Alexandra's tactical experience had anticipated their reaction, positioning Céleste where she could observe without being seen while preparing to strike at the moment when confusion would be greatest. "Now!" Alexandra commanded as Santos moved past her hiding place, his consciousness guiding her hands as she drew the derringer she had taken from Dutch Morrison's body and pressed it against the gang leader's neck. "Drop your weapons," she said in a voice that carried authority she had never possessed before, "or I'll blow your head clean off." The combination of surprise and Alexandra's deadly presence gave her words weight that made hardened criminals freeze in place. But the standoff lasted only seconds before one of Santos's companions tried to turn his gun toward Céleste, forcing her to pull the trigger while diving for cover as the saloon erupted into a battlefield where bullets flew like deadly rain. Alexandra's combat experience guided her movements as she rolled behind the bar, his consciousness analyzing angles and positions while directing her return fire with precision that belonged to a legendary gunfighter rather than a terrified saloon girl. The arrival of Sheriff Hawkins and his deputies turned the tide of the battle, but not before two of the gang members escaped through windows and side doors, carrying word of the failed plan to Jacob Baxter and the rest of their criminal organization. "We hurt them badly," Alexandra said, as the gun smoke cleared and the immediate danger passed. "But we didn't finish them. Baxter will know that someone exposed his operation, and he'll be coming for revenge against everyone who played a role in stopping him. This fight is far from over." Jacob Baxter's reaction to the destruction of his carefully planned robbery was exactly what Alexandra had predicted: cold rage focused on identifying and eliminating everyone responsible for disrupting his criminal empire. The gang leader's network of informants and contacts throughout the territory made him a formidable enemy even in defeat, and his reputation for brutal vengeance ensured that anyone who had crossed him would be marked for death until justice or bullets settled the score. "Baxter is not like other outlaws," Alexandre explained as reports of the gang leader's movements reached Perdition Gulch through the territorial communication network. "He's a strategist who thinks several moves ahead. And he's ruthless enough to target innocent people if he believes it will draw out his real enemies. We need to assume that everyone who helped us is now in danger, including the sheriff and his deputies." The confirmation of Alexandra's warning came when one of Sheriff Hawkins's informants was found dead outside town, killed with the kind of precision that sent a clear message about the fate that awaited anyone who cooperated with the law against the Baxter Gang. The murder was both warning and challenge, designed to terrorize potential allies while drawing the people responsible for the gang's defeat into a confrontation where superior numbers would decide the outcome. Celeste's role in the battle had not gone unnoticed by the surviving gang members, and her description was already circulating through criminal networks as the mysterious woman who had helped destroy their operation. "They know about you now," Alexandra said grimly, "which means staying in Perdition Gulch is no longer safe. But running away won't solve the problem either, because Baxter will keep hunting until he finds you or until someone stops him permanently." The decision to take the fight to Jacob Baxter rather than waiting for him to come to them was born of desperation and determination in equal measure, acknowledging that their only hope for survival lay in completing the work that Alexandra had begun months earlier. "I know where he'll go to ground," Alexandra said as they planned their next move. "There's an old fortress in the Sangre Mountains that's been used by outlaws for decades, defensible but isolated. Perfect for a man who needs time to regroup and plan his revenge. If we move quickly, we can reach him before he's ready for another fight." The journey to the Sangre Mountains was treacherous, even without the threat of waiting enemies, as the trail wound through desert canyons and rocky passes where ambush was always possible, and rescue would be impossible if things went wrong. Celeste had never ridden such distances or faced such physical challenges, but Alexandra's knowledge of survival and tactics helped her navigate dangers that would have stopped most frontier women in their tracks. "Pain is temporary," Alexandra encouraged, when exhaustion and saddle sores made every mile an ordeal. "But failure is permanent. Baxter will use every day we give him to recruit new gang members and plan attacks against innocent people. The longer we wait, the stronger he becomes and the weaker our chances of stopping him." His determination became her strength, driving her forward when her own will might have faltered. Sheriff Hawkins had insisted on accompanying them despite the personal risk, bringing 2 volunteers who were willing to face almost certain death rather than allow criminals to terrorize their community with impunity. The small posse was undermanned and outgunned, but they carried the moral authority of law and justice, along with Alexandra's tactical genius and Celeste's surprising skills with weapons she should never have learned to use. The first sign that they were approaching their destination came when Alexandra's consciousness suddenly tensed with recognition and warning, his mental voice carrying urgency that made Celeste's hands tighten on her horse's reins. "We're being watched," he said quietly. "There are at least 3 men positioned in the rocks ahead, probably scouts left behind to give warning if anyone followed their trail. We need to take them out quietly, or risk alerting the main force before we're ready to attack." The elimination of Baxter's sentries required skills that belonged entirely to Alexandra's consciousness, as Celeste found herself moving with deadly grace through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate silently. "Trust my experience," he said as she crept through shadows that seemed too shallow to hide a person. "Your body remembers what my mind knows about moving unseen and striking without warning. Let the knowledge flow through you without questioning how it's possible." The guards never knew what hit them, their death's silent warnings that justice was finally coming to the Sangre Mountains. The outlaw fortress that Jacob Baxter had chosen for his stronghold was everything Alexandra remembered and more, a natural rock formation enhanced by criminal engineering to create an almost impregnable position that commanded views of all approaches while providing multiple escape routes for anyone who knew the territory. "He's got maybe a dozen men with him," Alexandra estimated as they observed the stronghold from a concealed position. "Good fighters, well-armed and positioned to hold off an army if necessary. This won't be easy." But Alexandra's knowledge of the fortress included secrets that Jacob Baxter didn't know, including a hidden passage that connected to the main complex through caves that had been forgotten by everyone except the Cajun gunfighter who had used them during a previous confrontation with different criminals. "There's a way in," he told Céleste as they studied their target. "But it's dangerous and requires someone small enough to fit through spaces that most men couldn't navigate. You'll be going in alone, at least initially." The infiltration route that Alexandra described sounded like suicide, involving a climb down a sheer cliff face followed by a crawl through caves that could collapse at any moment, all leading to an entrance that might be guarded or blocked entirely. But it was also their only hope of reaching Jacob Baxter before his numerical advantage made victory impossible. And Céleste's courage had been tested enough to prove that she could handle challenges that would terrify most people. "I'll be with you every step of the way," Alexandra promised as she prepared for the most dangerous mission of her life. "My consciousness will guide your movements and warn you of hazards, while my skills will keep you alive if you encounter enemies. We've come too far and sacrificed too much to fail now, when justice is finally within reach." The descent into the caves was a nightmare of loose rock and unstable footing, with Alexandra's knowledge providing the only thing standing between Céleste and a fatal fall into darkness that seemed to stretch forever. But his guidance proved flawless, leading her through passages that opened eventually into the heart of the outlaw stronghold, where Jacob Baxter waited with the confidence of a man who believed himself untouchable by the forces of law and justice. Jacob Baxter was everything the stories said and worse, a man whose intelligence and charisma had been corrupted by greed and violence until he became the kind of predator that decent people feared in their nightmares. His presence filled the main chamber of the fortress like a physical force, commanding attention and inspiring fear even among the hardened criminals who served under his leadership. "That's him," Alexandra said unnecessarily, his mental voice carrying hatred that transcended death as he looked upon the man who had ordered his murder through cowardice and treachery. "The coward who had me killed by a sniper rather than facing me in fair combat. He's been terrorizing innocent people for months while I've been helpless to stop him, but that ends today." Céleste's position in the shadows gave her a perfect view of Baxter's operations as he planned new crimes and allocated resources among his gang members, his organizational skills evident in the way he coordinated multiple criminal enterprises simultaneously. But Alexandra's focus was entirely on the personal confrontation that had been months in the making, the final reckoning between justice and the man who had thought himself clever enough to escape consequences through assassination. "We need to separate him from his men," Alexandra said, as they observed the gang's activities. "In a straight fight, we're outnumbered too badly to win, but if we can isolate Baxter and force him into single combat, my skills through your body should be enough to defeat him. The key is creating a situation where his men can't intervene without risking their leader's life." The opportunity came when Baxter dismissed his lieutenants to prepare for a raid on a nearby mining camp, leaving him temporarily alone in the main chamber while reviewing maps and counting gold from previous robberies. Céleste emerged from the shadows with Alexandra's deadly grace, her weapon trained on the man who had caused so much suffering, while her voice carried authority that belonged to a legendary gunfighter rather than a saloon girl. "Jacob Baxter," she said with Alexandra's confidence, "you killed the wrong man 6 months ago, and now you're going to pay for that mistake." Baxter's reaction to seeing a young woman emerge from the shadows of his supposedly secure stronghold was a mixture of surprise, anger, and calculating assessment as he tried to understand how his defenses had been breached and what threat she actually represented. "I don't know who you are, girl," he said with dangerous calm, "but you've made the last mistake of your very short life. Guards!" "He's stalling for time," Alexandra warned as Céleste kept her weapon trained on the gang leader while listening for the sound of approaching footsteps. "His men are probably close enough to hear him, but the cave acoustics will confuse them about our location. We have maybe 2 minutes before they find us, which means this needs to end quickly." "Your guards can't help you," Céleste said, her voice carrying Alexandra's confidence, even as her heart raced with fear and adrenaline. "You're going to face justice for your crimes, starting with the murder of Alexandre Beaumont 6 months ago in Silver Creek. He was a better man than you'll ever be, and his death demands payment." Baxter's expression changed when he heard Alexandra's name, recognition and concern, replacing his initial dismissive attitude as he realized that his past had finally caught up with him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "Beaumont is dead," he said carefully, his hand moving slowly toward his gun while his eyes never left Céleste's face. "I made sure of that myself. So either you're crazy or someone's been telling you stories that ain't true." "Now," Alexandra commanded as Baxter's hand reached his weapon, his consciousness guiding Céleste's movements as both fighters drew simultaneously in a confrontation that would have been impossible to predict but felt inevitable once it began. The exchange of gunfire was brief and decisive, with Alexandra's legendary speed and accuracy proving superior even when channeled through someone else's body, his final shot finding its target just as Baxter's bullet whistled past Céleste's ear. The gang leader's death was anticlimactic after months of pursuit and preparation, his body crumpling to the stone floor while his eyes held surprise rather than pain or regret. "It's finished," Alexandra said with satisfaction that carried undertones of sadness. "Justice has been served, and the innocent people of this territory are safe from his predations. But I think our time together is about to end, and I need you to know how grateful I am for everything you've given me." The arrival of Sheriff Hawkins and his men at the fortress was perfectly timed, as they reached the main chamber just as the echoes of gunfire were fading and Céleste was standing over Jacob Baxter's body with smoking weapons in her hands. The sight of a young woman who had somehow infiltrated an outlaw stronghold and eliminated its leader single-handedly was beyond their experience, but the evidence of her success was undeniable. "Miss Moreau," Sheriff Hawkins said with amazement and respect, "I don't pretend to understand how you managed to do what a dozen experienced lawmen couldn't accomplish, but this territory owes you a debt that can never be repaid. Jacob Baxter and his gang have terrorized honest folks for years, and you've given them justice when the law couldn't reach them. The remaining gang members surrendered without resistance once their leader was dead, their loyalty having been based on fear and profit rather than genuine commitment to Baxter's cause. The fortress yielded evidence of dozens of unsolved crimes, along with stolen gold and valuables that could be returned to their rightful owners, making Céleste's victory complete in ways that went far beyond simple vengeance. But even as the others celebrated their triumph over evil, Céleste could feel Alexandra's presence beginning to fade, his consciousness becoming less distinct, and his mental voice growing weaker with each passing hour. "The work is finished," he said gently, his words carrying acceptance rather than regret. "I can feel something calling me toward whatever comes after life, and I think it's time for me to answer that call. You don't need me anymore. You have strength and skills of your own now." The realization that success meant separation from the man who had become her closest companion and deepest love was more devastating than any physical wound, forcing Céleste to confront the possibility that saving others might cost her the one relationship that had given meaning to her dangerous new life. "Don't leave me," She whispered into the darkness of the cave, speaking to the voice that might already be too distant to hear her plea. I love you, Alexandre, and I can't imagine facing the world without you beside me. Alexandre's response to Céleste's declaration of love carried all the emotion that a legendary gunfighter had learned to hide during his violent life, his mental voice breaking with feelings that transcended the boundaries between life and death. I love you too, mon cœur, he said, using the French endearment that revealed depths of tenderness his reputation had never suggested. You've given me something I never had when I was alive, someone who knew my heart instead of just my guns. That gift is more precious than immortality itself. The hours that followed their victory were spent in painful intimacy as Alexandre's consciousness grew steadily weaker, their final conversations covering everything they had never had time to say during their partnership in pursuing justice. He shared memories of his life before violence had claimed him, while she spoke of dreams for a future that would have to be built without his presence and protection. You're stronger than you know, Alexandre said as his mental voice became barely audible even to her concentrated attention. The skills I shared with you aren't just borrowed, they've become part of who you are now. You can protect yourself and others, you can seek justice for those who need it, and you can build a life that honors both your own dreams and the work we did together. Sheriff Hawkins found Céleste sitting alone outside the fortress as dawn broke over the Sangre Mountains, her face marked by tears for a loss that no one else could understand or share. Are you all right, Miss Moreau? He asked gently, his lawman's instincts recognizing grief, even when he couldn't identify its source. You've been through more than any person should have to endure, and if you need time to recover from what happened here, I'll make sure you have whatever you need. Tell him you're fine, came Alexandre's voice one final time, so faint that Céleste almost missed it entirely. Live your life, ma belle. Love someone who can hold you in return. Be happy. And remember that somewhere beyond the veil of death, a Cajun gunfighter will always be watching over you with love that transcends time itself. The silence that followed was absolute and permanent, leaving Céleste alone with memories of the most extraordinary partnership in the history of the frontier. 5 years later, Céleste Beaumont, she had taken Alexandre's last name in honor of their love, stood on the porch of her ranch house watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her of the man who had shared her mind and heart during the most dangerous period of her life. The territorial marshal's badge on her vest caught the light, a symbol of the career she had built using skills that Alexandre had given her and courage that had been forged in the fires of their partnership. The ranch she had built with money from various bounties and rewards had become a sanctuary for people who needed fresh starts. Former outlaws seeking redemption, women escaping violent situations, and anyone else who understood that sometimes survival required the courage to completely reinvent yourself. Her reputation as someone who could handle trouble had made the property a place where peace was protected by the implicit threat of very deadly consequences for anyone who disturbed it. The children who played in her yard included orphans she had adopted and the offspring of couples who worked on the ranch, their laughter filling spaces that might have been lonely if she had allowed herself to dwell on what she had lost rather than celebrating what she had found. Her life was full and meaningful, dedicated to protecting the innocent and serving justice in ways that would have made Alexandre proud. But the most miraculous moment had come 3 months earlier, when she had awakened from sleep to find a familiar presence sharing her consciousness once again. Alexandre's mental voice as clear and strong as it had been during their first partnership. "Did you miss me, mon cœur?" he had asked with amusement that carried undertones of joy. "It seems that love really is stronger than death, and that some partnerships are meant to be eternal." The explanation for his return was as mysterious as his original appearance had been, but Céleste had long since learned not to question miracles that brought happiness rather than demanding logical explanations for impossible blessings. They were together again, their love transcending the boundaries between life and death, their partnership dedicated to protecting the innocent and serving justice in a world that still needed heroes willing to risk everything for what was right. And as the stars emerged in the darkening sky above their ranch, Céleste smiled and whispered into the desert wind, "Welcome home, Alexandre. We have work to do." His laughter in response was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, promising adventures and challenges and love that would endure forever, no matter what obstacles the frontier might place in their path.